All right, I think I got cut off for part one, so we're still looking at the hearts of urbanization, and you can see on the screen that each of these hearts are one of the reasons why they were able to rise as a city is because they had agricultural surplus. They have things like social stratification, which allows the fact that there's a ruling class or a government in place to actually build and to create the conditions that will allow cities to form and also allow cities to be maintained. So really the functions of ancient cities included centers of power, which I already kind of mentioned. Often these cities were headquarters for early heads of states. We also talked about religious centers, so whether there be priests or temples or shrines were generally located in the cities. Definitely connected to the ancient cities as economic centers. So most of these cities we see are markets, provide for markets for trade with wealthy merchants, land owners, livestock owners, and traders that they begin operating and living actually in these urban environments. And then finally, we mentioned before in terms of educational centers. So that holds true today, but in ancient times, of course, city residents could also, we had to include teachers and philosophers to educate new generations of the urban elite, so to speak. All right, so the diffusion of urbanization, early urbanization, looking at it through the lens or the focus at the Mediterranean. So cities and settlements were first established in the area around the eastern Mediterranean Sea about 2,500 years ago, the forerunners of the ancient Greek civilization. So the ancient Greeks organized their civilization into city-states, which are basically self-governing communities and included the nearby countryside. Now, the settlement provided the government, the military protection, and other public services for the surrounding hinterland. Athens was probably the first city to reach the population of 100,000 during the 5th and the 4th centuries BCE. Now, when the Romans succeeded the Greeks as rulers of the region, their urban empire incorporated not only the Mediterranean shores, but also the larger part of the interior of Europe, North Africa, and the former Mesopotamia lands. All right, so here's a map just to kind of refresh your memory in terms of the Roman Empire. Now, you definitely studied the Roman Empire back in 7th grade. We talked about probably the fall of the Roman Empire. But that at the height of the Roman Empire, we have a massive urban system that is in place. Now, some of the reasons why the Romans were able to expand so rapidly and take such a large territory is the fact that we have connectivity. The Romans are very skilled in terms of connecting their transportation. We have Roman roads. We're able to unite such a large empire. We have the creation of walls, which serve as protection. Interesting enough, the Romans are one of the first to actually use the grid pattern for a city system. So the grid pattern, kind of think of, grid paper, kind of the squares. So we take for granted that, older cities are actually arranged in a grid where you have kind of like 1st Street and 2nd Street. So the Romans are the first ones to introduce that type of pattern. The Romans are also very skilled in terms of creating public works. They introduced aqueducts and baths and sewer systems. So of course nothing's perfect. You could definitely make the counter argument that these cities are crowded, they're dirty, there's sickness and disease, but definitely the connectivity factor of the Roman Empire creates that major urban system in ancient history at least. All right, also on the screen I want to introduce the concept of the second urban revolution, which is tied to our discussion of the Industrial Revolution, which of course we could tie to our discussion of the second agricultural revolution. So hopefully at this point of the year you're able to make the connections to our other units. So the Industrial Revolution actually created what it was called the manufacturing city. And this is where the factories actually attracted the laborers from the rural areas and other countries to tenements or city apartments constructed to provide housing for the factory workers. Remember, the agricultural revolution resulted in more food. If there's more food, the population booms. Of course, we could even tie that back to our DTM model and our population unit. And with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, now we have the ability to feed more people. People are moving to the cities. So you can see it just kind of that continuous cycle. So the fact of the matter is that as we see the factories beginning to rise, of course, we need places to house those workers. We don't have necessarily transportation early on. So a lot of the housing has to be close near the factory. Now, older streets gave way to broad, straight boulevards to accommodate the flow of commercial traffic. And eventually we'll get to automobiles, but that will take some time. So take a look at the screen. I want to go back to the word tenements. So these images are kind of tied to tenements and industrial revolution. So we mentioned before, even though the glory of Rome, there was definitely some drawbacks in terms of crowded, disease, pollution. Same could very much be said about the Industrial Revolution, industrial cities and manufacturing, especially I think these images are taken from London specifically. And then finally, we're going to also tie this to the last piece I want to touch upon, or introduce, I should say, which is the discussion of the modern city. So the modern city is definitely what we saw in the documentary film Urbanized. And the modern city allows the fact that transportation and road systems allow for the dispersion, or they use the term sprawl, and the growth of the suburbs. So we don't necessarily see that people need to actually live in the city to walk to the factory and have access to those services. Now they were able to commute with highways and automobiles. So we'll see how the sprawl will also affect and suburbanization that ties into our discussion of cities. All right, so I think we'll stop there. It's about a 20-minute lecture. You're welcome. And then we're going to continue our discussion in class regarding the city. All right? See you in class.